welcome to the show, AJ. Excited to have you on and talk coaching. We've just had a discussion. I usually obviously have the football coaches, but it's great to get another team sport coach, and you're obviously in the netball coaching space, and just comparing and having a chat about how you go about it, your coaching, and whether there is much difference. And I'm sure listeners are going to love to hear about your pathway to what you're doing now. If you just don't mind, give us a little rundown of your current role out there at the Hawks Netball Club and how the
Yeah,
season's going and so forth.
yeah. I'm just looking in the background at your footies and everything. I probably should have moved my bikes there and put some netballs in the background, but anyway.
No.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on, James. Yeah. Look, I've been a coach for about 15 years now. Coaching netball started in 2007. I'm currently the head coach at Hawks Netball Club, which is a Victorian Netball League club, which I guess for footy folks, that's, I guess you'd call it the VFL equivalent of footy. Head coach at Hawks, which is actually affiliated with Hawthorn Footy Club, like they're our major sponsor. So there's a little bit of a footy tie in there. We've got three teams at Hawks. I coach two of them, the two open teams. I also coach at Dingley, which is a footy netball club down in the Southern Footy Netball League. This year I was the assistant coach for the under-17s state team as well. So it's been a pretty big year, to say the least.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think last year you had a bit of success with the Hawks.
Yeah, last year we won the Division 1 premiership. So there's in VNL there's championship, Division 1, and then under 19. So that middle team, Division 1. Yeah, we pulled it together in finals and knocked off the undefeated top team in the semi, and then went straight through to the grand final and managed to win that. Pretty special year. I mean, if you coach for long enough, you know how hard they are to win at those levels. So we definitely savoured that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah, I was just mentioned to you earlier. One of my previous guests mentioned we should get some guests on the show with coaching different sports and whether there is a difference. I know you're a footy fan. Do you think there'd be much difference in the way you go about it compared to maybe a football coach? Is there any differences that come straight to mind for you between the two sports, and whether there needs to be any different sort of coaching philosophy or the way where you conduct yourself during the sessions and on weekends?
Yeah, I talked about it a little bit with footy coaches, sort of in my local league and that sort of thing. And I mean, obviously there's some differences coaching the blokes versus coaching the girls, which I mean there is men's netball now, but I'm mostly focused on coaching the girls. Just the approach that you take to coaching those players and the way you kind of I don't know, nurture a little bit, I guess sometimes, and just the way you, I guess, deal with players day to day, and I guess empower girls slightly differently to the way you might rev up the guys sometimes, I suppose. So like that's probably the main difference, I guess, is just that that difference between the two sexes, sort of trying to find the best approach for both.
So what does sort of empowering girls look like for you to sort of get the best out of them come game day?
Yeah, look, I mean, with my coaching, I guess I always try to, like, if you're going to be successful, it has to come from the athletes themselves, and they've got to be able to, fix the things that are going on court. So, there's no point in waiting. Like 15-minute quarters are a long time. So, if you can't fix something yourselves out there, so like, the girls are probably sick of me saying it, but almost the first thing I ask them whenever they come off court or at the end of training is, like, I ask them, what did you think of that? How did you find that? And basically make them give feedback to themselves before I kind of jump in. I mean, there's always a time and a moment for jumping in and telling them what you think, but I think for me, it's always about, like, them learning and them being able to, coach each other in those moments, so that when they do find themselves up against a bit of a challenge, they've got the tools and they've been through it before them with each other, and they can I guess work their way through it together.
You find that with your players who really execute that sort of feedback and real time communication during the game. Are they the players who have been there for multiple years, or have you seen some players who've just come into your program and been able to execute that sort of dialogue in a quick time frame?
It's definitely one that just comes more naturally to others. I mean, this year, like obviously, I said we won that premiership just as that with my Division 1 team, for an example. Just last year we won that premiership, and inevitably a couple of players move up to the higher team and a couple of players move on. So we do have some young players who come into the team this year, and that can be daunting when you've got players that are they're 19, 20, and their teammates who are sort of legends of the club are 28, 29, and really well respected. So it can be a bit of a challenge to help those players find their voice, and it does tend to come from the older players initially. But we just often set up little activities or pair players up so that they are kind of not forced to engage in that way, but I guess to help them feel more comfortable over time, expressing themselves, maybe not quite to the same extent that the older players do, but feeling comfortable in those, in those moments to actually have a voice and understand that it's not just the senior players' responsibility to pick up what's going on court and improve it. It's everyone's responsibility, and they're just as valued in that as the older players are.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm just thinking in an AFL sense, you see a few of the young AFL players who have managed to be able to talk to the group. You see it on camera actually on game day, but it's sort of few and far between. I think from obvious ones that come to mind, like you think back to Joel Seld, I think could do it, but went on to be one of the greatest captains ever. I remember Callum Mills did it for Sydney. I remember watching him his second year, and I was thinking that's quite impressive. Talking to that group, which had a lot of megastars in it. And I think even, I'm a Bombers supporter. I think Zach Merritt was probably similar as well. He, I think he captained the club in that 2016 year as a third-year player. So, it is pretty rare, isn't it? And if they do, I think if you are getting that sort of communication from a young player in the senior ranks, probably shows they're going on to some high-level leadership positions.
Oh, totally. I mean, in that 2018, we had success last year. We won a premiership in Division 1 as well in 2018, and I think my captain of that team was only 21. And she was elected by her teammates, and she was just, I guess she led by example on the court as much as anything, but also just had a quiet way about it off the court in the way that she she was sort of able to bring the younger players and the older players in together. So yeah, you're right. Like there's some pretty special individuals when they can, kind of harness all of that as a young person, because often it takes a long time to learn those skills for some people.
Looking at the elite pathways of football, and in the last sort of 5-10 years, it's been obvious to the fan watching that the relationship coaches are building now with players is a lot stronger maybe than what it was, say, 15, 20 years ago, when it was a bit more, autocratic type style, telling them what they to do rather than explaining it, sort of how they go about why we're doing certain things. Has netball evolved a bit like that? Has it been a similar story there, or is netball different back in, say, the 90s or early 2000s, and sort of stayed in that sort of space up until now?
Oh no, definitely. I mean, it's almost a different world now than what it was. I guess when I started, and then hearing stories from people that I coach with now who were players back in those days, like some of the things that the coaches made them do, I just don't think you wouldn't get away with it anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, just I guess relentless, just driving the players constantly and just having no wiggle room or no sort of light and shade, I suppose. It's just, it was just all just, hard, we do this, this is what the person, now you've really got to kind of, know your athletes, understand that, I guess, as well, like different commitments that players have outside of, especially at the sub-elite level, understanding those pressures and those sort of things. So, I guess like for me, at the end of the day, you want your players to come to their sport and really look forward to going there and not see it as a place where they're just going to be, hammered 24/7. So yeah, I think the requirements and expectations as far as player management and that sort of thing have definitely come a long way, even in the last 5 years, but definitely over the last 10 to 15, it's almost probably unrecognisable.
You know, I always think about like I sometimes think about say 50, 60 years ago, back in the 50s and 60s, you heard stories of training camps with players where they'd flog them to death and they
Yep.
wouldn't even give them water. You know, they water's for weak. And it's just absurd hearing that
Mm,
today.
mm.
Is there, and this would be a crystal ball, I wonder what we're doing in 2023 we're going to look back in say 30 years time going, what the hell were we doing at that time?
Yeah.
Is there any area of netball coaching that you might sort of think, oh, this is going to change dramatically in time? Is there anything that you see a trend coming that might be headed towards coaching in your sport?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I guess one of the interesting ones I always think about is the way that exercise and sports science is, and I mean in the last especially probably 5 years or so, everything's very sports specific, and the girls are asked to do a lot of just repeat interval um, running, for example, and yeah, I definitely agree with that. Obviously, it's got to be sports specific, but I think that a lot of girls miss that sort of general fitness. That I feel like we'll probably fitter. I feel like players in a lot of ways were probably fitter back in the day, just like generally fitter and had bigger engines. Now it's straight into pre-season. It's just interval running straight away, interval running, and some players just never build up that base tank that serves them really well as they progress through their netball. So yeah, I sort of just wonder whether we'll look back at some of the sports science stuff and in a few years and be like, we might have and find that we might have sort of stepped back from that a little bit. I'm not sure. Be interesting to see.
Yeah, I always find this space interesting too. And obviously, in my world, it's sort of football space and the fitness of players and how professional they go. And those who won't watch this on YouTube, you'll see a couple of bikes in the background. I know you're right into your triathlons and running and so forth. Um, and I, as a kid, did a bit of athletics myself, and just the amount of work like Olympians and the degree they go to with their training. And I love the Tour de France too, and the levels that they go to from measuring food to, checking, lactic, where the lactates during workouts. And I wonder how far netball and football is going to go in time with that. I'll be like, there's clearly a gap between like Olympian and what an average AFL football does.
Yeah.
But in saying that, like I even look back I'm at the Falcons, which is elite under 18, under 19 program. They're still training bloody hard. Like during preseason, there's 3 pretty major sessions, 2 3-hour sessions, and to do much around that is pretty much recovery, really. I
Yeah.
don't think anything more than that you'd probably be overdoing it. I think is probably my assessment. What do you think of netball? Is there going to be, especially the elite level? I know you'd watch them closely. Is there going to be another push? And I'm talking a fair bit here, but is like AFL has done a dramatic change, I think, from the 90s till now. Like there's no doubt about it. Like in terms of their professionalism, but I still reckon there might be some lengths to go.
Yeah, it's funny because like you said, everything, a lot of it is about, recovery and, managing player loads and that sort of thing. But then it's funny, like I've just, come away from netball nationals with the under 17s group, which was in March, April. And, like they're 15, 16-year-old kids playing, in some cases for the stronger players, 2 games a day, 5, 6 days in a row, for an entire week. And, like during COVID, when Super Netball, the elite competition, went into the bubble, they were playing 2 games a week, and it's funny how quickly we sort of forget that, and like the players' bodies, in a lot of in some sense can handle probably more than than what we think they throw, what they're probably used to, I suppose. So yeah, I'm not sure. It's an interesting discussion because like I said, recovery is obviously important, but I think loading and I think players' limits are probably in some cases further than what we give them credit for.
Yeah, and especially when you got a team of whether it be a dozen or 20, a group of an AFL club would have 40 odd players on a list. It's you're going to get different levels, I guess, too, of how professional some players are. And I guess the good teams you probably find, maybe the Geelongs of the world, they are all closer to that professional, really elite level standards that they drive. Do you have with your coaching, do you have any sort of key principles for better and more consistent netball for your players, and how to get that out of your team? Do you have anything that guides your coaching in that regard?
Yeah, we've just talked about fitness and that sort of thing. I mean, fitness has always been a huge one for me, and I think it's probably been an underpinning part of the successful teams that I have is the players that we bring in or the players that are part of those teams are players that have bought into that, and players that are committed to their conditioning, because over an hour game of netball, like, it makes a season as well, as far as not picking up injuries. And like, with only 7 players on a netball court, if you lose a key part of that because they injure something because they're not quite up to the load, then that makes a huge dent in the team and your chances. So like conditioning and like the girls, I mean, they dread preseason as much as any footy player, and they dread the fitness testing and the yo-yo testing. But it's they know that it's a huge part of what we do and why we do it. And so the other part of the question again, sorry.
I was just talking about the more consistent and sort of better team performance really with players. So you sort of covered a good bit there. So is there anything else that you would help drive that performance out of your players? Obviously, fitness is a key one.
Look, the other thing that I really push, and you probably find a lot of elite coaches would say similar, is just you just can't drill the basics enough. Like, in a game of netball, the team that can hold up those basic skills and limit the number of errors, especially under pressure and especially under fatigue as you push towards the end of the game, is just critical. So I think if sort of coaches lower down came to a state league or a super netball training session, they'd probably be a little bit shocked at just how simple some of the stuff that the coaches do actually is, and some of the stuff that we do actually is. But it's just that repetitive, land this way, give this ball, like, execute that skill accurately under fatigue, under physical pressure. And that often is just what separates, teams that make the top 4 or teams that are able to win a really close final. So, we drill that stuff relentlessly. There's a hard skill and ball work component to every training session that we do, whether it's 20 minutes or 30 minutes, or whether it's at the end of a hard running block or something like that. I've always just had that as a sort of underpinning principle of the way we approach our training at our clubs.
Is there any, on the flip side, any common coaching mistakes you might have seen in netball that you might recommend coaches to avoid?
I've written on my website, I've written a couple of articles about this sort of thing. And I think one of the biggest ones is just too much talking. I think that there's a lot to be said for just letting the players, setting things up quickly, letting the players work through it a bit, and then giving them a little bit of feedback. But, I see coaches, I see teams a lot of the time, training nearby, who are just, there's a lot of standing around, a lot of the coach like explaining things and talking through 4 different scenarios of what could and should and happen. And the players learn a lot more by just doing sometimes, and just getting some repetition and letting them kind of figure it out. And that didn't work, I'll do this next time. And again, it's just empowering the players to be able to learn and adjust and I guess develop themselves rather than standing around. I mean, I've seen sessions where 90-minute sessions where the coach is probably talking for 25-30 minutes of it. I mean, that's a huge amount of opportunity lost, where the players could be just engaged and I guess learning themselves through doing.
It's interesting too, just talking about my own experience with being a development coach too in this program I'm part of now. So you got your line coach, obviously, and then you got the development coach, and just and it's trying to find that sweet spot about the talking side of things. And so you might have the head coach gives a bit of an address, and then the line coach might chip in, and then
Yeah,
as development coach, I sort of find I have to let go of the ego and just don't just talk to talk,
yeah,
to be the third voice in there, and it's really
totally.
tricky actually, because you want to feel
Yeah,
valued, but same time, you know that I think for the better for the group, it's just got to say something. If they miss something, or you feel really going to make a good impact, say it. But it
yeah. I
is
mean, always,
interest. Yeah, it's an
as
interesting
I say,
spot to
just
be.
always look for those. You know, we always say in netball, you know, and probably footy as well, just coachable moments. Like, you know, you might let the players do, you know, 3 or 4 repetitions, then you see something that's really pertinent, and like, you know, we highlight that, but then let them get back to it, not,
Yep.
you know, instead not feel the need to constantly jump in every single, you know, every single bit, because yeah, I mean the players get cold as much as anything, but also like you can see them switch off. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've had a discussion with a couple of guests in the past, but it's on game day too. Could you walk us through a bit about how you go about giving your messages on game day? Obviously, it's a highly sort of stressful environment for players. They're all trying to perform, and you always do
Yep.
question what is actually cutting through and what are they actually listening to and absorbing. How do you think about that, and how do you go about that on game day, and particularly through your quarter, your halftime breaks?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm lucky. I've got assistant coaches in each of my teams that I coach as well, which is super handy. So you know, we kind of adjust it on the fly. Like if it's, you know, for example, Wednesday night just gone, we one of our teams just as a group just wasn't quite clicking. So in that scenario, I just said to the assistant coaches, look, I'm just going to talk to the whole team, and it was sort of more of a general chat about what we need to do, transitioning the ball down the court. Other times, if things are going, you know, okay, then you know I'll chat to the assistants and say, you take the attack end. You know, these couple of quick things that I want you that we need to pass on, and then I'll take the defense end, or vice versa. And you know, often it's like I said before. Often it's about you know asking the players what they're seeing out there, so that they can sort of, you know, talk their way through it, rather than me you know, I guess highlighting it all for them. But yeah, I guess my approach is normally to sort of target the area that's the, you know, that's been the biggest challenge throughout that quarter, I suppose. And you know, just a couple of quick points. Like players can only take on, you know, 1, maybe 2 things in those little breaks that they're actually going to be able to go out and do. So you know, 1 or 2 quick things that we think can get the biggest bang for the buck, and then get back out there.
Yeah, and I've mentioned this story a couple of times in the show, but I think I was watching this doco on Kevin Sheedy, and he took and used to early days pre-game, he'd have a whole massive whiteboard filled with notes from top to bottom and all
Yeah,
different sorts of things. And there's just, I think Tim Watson made the comment that no one took it in. It was just
yeah,
so
yeah.
much stuff and material. And I think I think everyone sort of understands that at this day and age, and about
Mm.
the, you know, a few simpler points, which is a really good thing. In coaches in general, is there a coach you've come across that you really admire? It might be in netball, it might be in another sport. And why is that?
Yeah, I guess I probably, you know, I do look at the netball coaches and the way they go about it. I mean, and I've come across some, you know, I've had some incredible coaches and mentors along the way who, but I guess someone who I watch from afar that I really admire is Bryony Akel, who's the coach of the New South Wales Swifts. And I've never met Bryony. However, you know, every time I like see her and the way that she interacts with her players and the team and those around her on game day, it's calm, but also like you can see the care as
Yeah,
well. Like
yeah,
you know, she sort of empathizes with players in those moments and what they need, and she seems to know the like the exact right approach to give every player in those moments. And you know, you can see the players just, you know, worship the ground she stands on as far as the messages she's giving and stuff, but you can also see I guess the care that goes both ways between them. And you know, I mean, they're sitting top of the ladder at the moment,
mm,
and you know, have been a high performing team for the last few seasons. So, you know, someone like that, I think there's a lot that, you know, you can learn from, as far as, you know, coaching doesn't have to have that harder edge all the time. I'm sure, you know, I'm sure there's moments where she, you know, she has to crack the whip a little bit, but, you know, as far as getting the most of players on game day and having them in the right headspace to perform, you know, I think she's seems to be a master at it.
And I always like to ask guests: is there a player you've come across that you felt has really got sort of exceeded what people might have had thought as the expectations for them or their sort of talent level. Is there a player that you've seen, and how did they go about that if there was?
I don't know. I could probably highlight a whole. There's that 2018 Premiership team that I spoke about before. So I'll tell you a little bit of a story if you like. So I left the club that I'd been at for 10 years or so. It's just it was time to move on, and maybe a couple of differences of opinion about the way that the direction that some of the teams were taking, that sort of thing, which is that happens and that's fine. And part of that was there were a few players in that program who had sort of been, I guess, written off. A couple of them, they said, too small, you're not going to progress further. Some of them, they said, we just don't see it. They're just, we just don't see a future for them within our program. And so, I went across to Hawks, which is where I am now. And some of those players, because they didn't have a home, they followed me as part of that and gave them that opportunity. And yeah, I mean, 12 months, like that was 2017. So 12 months later, we won a premiership. And I don't know if I've ever had a group of players who sort of, I guess, bought into that team mentality as hard as that group did. And like every session they did, they trained to get the best out of each other. And there were some good players in that team, but I guess no sort of superstars that have progressed to the top level or anything like that, but just that willingness to work for each other and get the most out of each other from session to session. I just don't think you can put a price on players that are do that work for you, I guess. And not having to crack the whip as a coach all the time. Players that are self-driven and help each other as much. I think is and that forms a huge part of our selection policy for the way we select our teams now as well. It's about the people as much as anything, and we for players that are sort of that we don't know who are wanting to come into the program, we do research, we do like call a few people and ask a few questions about them, because I think that's so important. So yeah, I guess a long story short, I mean, that said, that whole to answer your question in a long way, yeah, like that group had I guess all but being written off, but came together and just worked hard together and had the belief in each other and managed to achieve something special. So like that I think those players will always have a pretty special bond.
Yeah, no, that's a really cool story. It's interesting, I think, having those players, to drive your team and as such, as you mentioned, through training, that is really important. And I'm sure all coaches who are listening have had moments when you had teams who haven't had those players within it really driving. Do you have any advice, and whether you have found this over the last few years, maybe with the Hawks, has there been a season where you maybe haven't quite had that as much and you've had to try and find ways to get that drive out of the group? And what were your tactics and coaching ways of doing that?
Yeah, I mean, like this. This current season's been an interesting one with our top championship team. With there's a lot of players who are stepping up to that level for the first time, and it's quite a new group. So, I mean, it's always it's part of the challenge and the fun of coaching, I guess, is trying to put together those puzzle pieces to help everyone sort of get everyone on the same page and get everyone to the level they need to be. So, I mean, we talked before about the pre-game, or the in-game messages and stuff, and I've sort of really adjusted that as we've gone this season. Like early on, it was very information heavy and preparation heavy, and these are the things that we're going to do tonight. And as it's gone on this season, it's kind of I've kind of adjusted it just to simplify it and just let the players kind of be calm and just focus on some really simple things, that they're going to be able to nail from week to week, rather than, giving them, 3 or 4, huge things that they need to, focus on, and that stresses them out, I suppose. So, just horses for courses a little bit. And you do kind of have to be able to adjust on the fly, and as you go through a season, and from group to group and from year to year, like different players, different personalities, different things that will work for some groups and not others.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was listening to an interview of Ross Lyon, I was St Kilda coach, and he's talking about nearly game day now. He's finding game day is back in the coach's seat. It's a bit like a keynote speech every game now, like trying to do that. And I thought that was interesting. I think Dimmer Harbutt was similar. You just mentioned you sort of probably backed away a little bit from that now. Is there any, do you have any advice on how to go about that pre-game speech, I guess, to your players? Is there anything that you found has worked well for you or hasn't particularly worked?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, not sure whether it's how different it is coaching the girls versus coaching the guys, but I think that it's quite interesting that they talk about it being like a real keynote speech like that. Like, I think that after about 3 or 4 minutes, I think that most players are probably like information saturated and they're ready to switch off. So like I said, I sort of keep it pretty simple. Like often I'll get the group, so the defenders, the mid-court and the goalers, to come together and just talk 2 minutes each, and pick out the things that they want to focus on, which we've probably brought up at training as well. So they're just rehashing those, and then I might talk for 2-3 minutes just to talk about what the opposition, things that we might focus on opposition wise. But that's really it. Like I feel like 90% of what you do is prepare a training, and then it's just those just quick little reminders once we get to game night, and just getting back to the basics that we want to execute as a team. And then, like, to be honest, before we go out to warm up, the last thing we do is like get one of the players to run like a quick 5-minute game. It could be like a little physical game, like might be some sort of competition, might be like a thinking game or something like that. So just something that they can have a bit of a laugh and just kind of relax a little bit, if it stops us, help them not to be too wound up as they're about to head out on court. So yeah, that's just the way I go about it. Other coaches do different. Some have huge reams of notes, but I just find that like I said, 90% of it is what you've prepared at training anyway, so the players should know it by the time we get to game night.
We've talked a bit on game day once you're at the venue and how you go about it. Do you have a routine from the moment you wake up in the morning to you get to the game or whatever time it kicks off?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's a blessing but a curse having like state league games on a Wednesday night, because it means you've got all day to just sit there and think about it, and yeah, you'd almost rather just get up in the morning like we do on a Saturday and just head down to the court. But yeah, look, I mean, sometimes I watch a little bit of footage just to refresh in my memory what something about us or something about the opposition, just so I'm clear on that. I'll just make a couple of notes that I'll bring up again during the pre-game. But yeah, that's I guess that's it for, as far as home. Like I always get there, at training and at games, I always make it a point to, and I think it's something that all coaches should think about, is just making sure that you're the first one there, and make sure that you're there and prepared, and that I think there's real value in seeing the players as they arrive as well, like saying g'day, but also just you can kind of observe them. Do they look like they're in a good headspace? Are they up and about? Are they I think that's something I sort of learn over time as well. Like, do you need to have a quick chat to them? Like, you just observe things just by being there and making sure that you're not rolling in as the last person, kind of just as the girls are about to start warm up. So yeah, I always just make sure I leave plenty of time to get there early, and then we just go through that pre-game routine once the game approaches.
Perfect. Do you have any? Obviously, coaching is very time consuming. For a lot of people, it's a voluntary role. Most coaches that would be listening is voluntary role. Do you have any time saving tips that you might have that you found sort of shaved half hour here, an hour here, but still didn't take away from the performance as a coach or the team?
Yeah, I think it's probably too simplistic to say be organised, but often I'll do sort of some game review like straight after the game while I'm still in that headspace, and while I've still got it fresh in my head. I think as well, like, I think a lot of coaches and certainly netball coaches that I talk to, they feel like they've got to reinvent the wheel every single session. They've got to come up with, an entirely new session every single week. But I think that there's a lot of value in, sticking with a theme and repeating some of those skills over a number of weeks. So, you don't have to spend 2 hours planning your training session every week thinking that the girls aren't going to be engaged. Like if if you build something over a few weeks and you can, almost run the same session, maybe with a few small tweaks, you'll probably get better bang for your buck out of that as far as the players' performance as well, because they're really nailing those skills rather than, doing something for an hour one week, never do it again, doing something for an hour the next week, never see it again. So, those sort of time-saving tips, or, I guess time-saving, strategies, just being smart about the way that you plan your sessions, I think, I think there's some value in that.
Awesome. Do you have any? I'll ask a couple of questions for you. Do you have any books you might recommend coaches grab a hold of that you found useful?
Look, I mean, I'm ashamed to say that I don't. I struggle to find time to read. It's probably a bad thing to say, but I struggle to find time to read a lot of books these days. I find that once I'm coaching sort of 5-6 days a week often, and when I get home, I'm sort of zonked, and I'll just collapse on the couch. But look, I mean, I do love watching any kind of sports doco when I get the opportunity. Like an obvious one is The Last Dance, and I think from a coaching perspective, I just found the story's amazing, but stories like that where so a small percentage of it is about the technical stuff, but such a large percentage of it is about the player management and the dealing with those personalities and knowing what each personality needs and how to kind of, I guess, put the pieces of the puzzle of those groups together. I find fascinating. And I mean, I know from my sport and from my coaching, if you've got one piece of that puzzle that just doesn't quite fit, how detrimental and how tough that can make it. So yeah, I find those sort of documentaries about the behind the scenes workings of teams and that sort of thing, really quite interesting.
Awesome. And if I could give you a banner that you could place on a coach's door that they're going to see day in, day out, what would you have written on that banner?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one for the play, and it's not something that I've sort of read anywhere or anything, but something that I often say to players and also coaches is just that this is a privilege. I think there'd be a lot of people and a lot of players and coaches and stuff who would love to be in the position to be able to play sport like we play sport and play at the level that we play at, for players that are at state league level or higher. So I just think it's something that I try to remember as well when I'm walking out the door, and if it's been a long week and I'm exhausted and you're not totally 100% keen to go to that session, but just trying to remember that it's a privilege to be a part of team sport, and it's a privilege to be able to do something like this that we do. So just a simple message that sometimes I remind the players about when they're grinding their way through pre-season, that it's yes, it's tough, but we're really lucky to be able to do it. So yeah.
And finally, talk to me about your online resource you've got for netball coaches, and what that involves, and where, if there's any other. I know obviously football and netball are very closely aligned. Is there any? Just chat to our listeners about that.
Yeah, so I run a website called thenetballcoach.com, which is basically a skills and drills resource, all video based. So it's all just coaches like myself and other state league or national, higher coaches, showing, aspiring or developing coaches how to set up drills, and also the coaching points that, that you sort of need to deliver or you need to look for within those drills. So it's just something that I sort of, I guess, came up with over time, like having been a coach at representative level and lower levels. It was always really hard to find coaches to learn from. Like not every club has a coach that they can sort of, bounce ideas off and has a coach that can sort of teach everyone those structures and some of those things. So yeah, I just sort of set about putting a few of those ideas down in videos and yeah, turned it into a bit of a resource. So yeah, look, there's coaches that have signed up from all over the world, and you know, find it a pretty valuable resource. And I mean, I even find it a valuable resource. Sometimes I go back and, you know, I need a couple of drills, so I go back and yeah, find some drills that I came up with, you know, 5-6 years ago. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun, and it's really rewarding as well, hearing from coaches that you know, that have found that it's helped them progress their coaching and I guess deliver some fun and engaging sessions for their teams. Because, you know, as we know, like netball and footy seasons are a very long season, and sometimes it's a bit hard to, you know, to find fresh content. So yeah, you know, I enjoy it, and it's been a real privilege.
Awesome, AJ. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show and talking about how you go about it. I'm sure listeners loved it, and all the best for the rest of the season. And I'm sure we'll chat again soon.
Well, good, mate. Love to. Thanks very much.